I think it's safe to say that the NZXT H1 has had more than its fair share of ups and downs. When the case launched a couple of years ago, it was seen as a smart design and it simplified the Mini ITX build for novice users. Leo reviewed the original H1 and he loved it. But not long after the launch of the H1, we had the issue with the PCIe riser cable and some of the units caught fire. NZXT dithered a bit in the way that it dealt with this problem, and that obviously upset a lot of people. So you would think that the perfect opportunity for NZXT to extinguish the stigma connected to the H1 once and for all would be to launch a brand new Mini ITX case, and that is exactly what we're looking at today. So here is the brand new NZXT H1 V2. So it's not going to take a genius to work out that there isn't a huge difference between the original H1 and the H1 V2. The V2 still comes as a package deal like the original did, with a CPU cooler, power supply, PCIe riser cable included. The price of the new one in the UK will be £339. It's expected to be available at all major retailers around the 15th of February. So when we get a new case to review, we often get a reviewer's guide, which is what I've got here. And this tells you all the important information about the new case or about a revised case, and it's a good help to us, and it makes it easier for us to pass on that information on to the consumer. So I'm going to go through this review and probably refer to this reviewer's guide because there is some good information on all the subtle changes that has been done in the H1 V2 that I think will make it, all those subtle changes together will make quite a big improvement to the H1. The H1 V2 still comes with an all-in-one CPU cooler. It's a 140mm unit, and it's one of those with the pump fitted to the radiator rather than on the CPU block, which is good for this because it keeps the CPU block compact, because obviously Mini ITX we're going to be limited with space inside the case. The dimensions of the case, it's slightly taller by 20mm, and it's also slightly wider front to back and slightly wider from side to side by about 8 or 9mm, both front to back and side to side. Might not sound like a lot, but that extra 20mm tall and that extra width is going to help with graphics card installation, so it's going to allow you to install the latest RTX 30 series and Radeon 6000 series cards that didn't fit in the original H1, because that was probably one of the biggest problems with the H1. It was quite limited to the size of graphics card that could be installed inside, and not only in terms of the dimensions of the graphics card but also the power as well, because the original came with a 650 watt gold rated power supply. The new one now comes with a 750 watt, so should be enough power there for virtually any RTX 30 series or RX 6000 series card. So straight away that sounds positive. When the H1 V2 does launch, it's going to be replacing the H1 V1, so you're not going to be able to buy the older, more compact version anymore. This is going to completely replace it. One of the main points of interest for the NZXT engineers when developing the H1 V2 was that extended GPU compatibility. So not only have we got bigger dimensions, only slightly bigger. I mean, in terms of the footprint, it's still a very small footprint, so this case is going to be easy to, store on your desk if you've only got quite a small space. But as well as those increasing dimensions, there's also a 92mm exhaust fan installed in the case now as well, so we're hoping that's going to help with the GPU temperature. Other improvements include an extra USB Type A port on the front I/O. Included with the case now is a PCIe Gen 4 riser cable. The H1 came with a Gen 3 cable, and also the replacement for the faulty riser cable, that was also a Gen 3. So now you're getting PCIe Gen 4, so again improving that support for RTX 30 series and Radeon 6000 series cards. And as well as that, you're also getting a fan hub to control the fan speed, pump speeds as well, and that can be controlled using the NZXT cam software. Another change that you might have already seen by looking at these two cases side by side is the holes on the steel side panels. On the original V1, the holes were around 3 to 3.5mm. On the V2, they're closer to 5mm now, so maybe that'll help with airflow along with that 92mm fan, hopefully we'll see an improvement in the thermal performance. So for those of you that maybe didn't see the original review of the H1, or you just want to refresh your memory, let's have a quick look around the case then. So the actual design of the case is very smart. It's great how it's been put together and how the side panels come off and everything. And also for those novice users that might not have much experience building as well, you can see that NZXT, they put little like stickers around places, like on this front panel, on the back panel. And it's basically like learn as you go with instructions of how to disassemble the case and how to install components inside, which I think is, you know, it's a clever idea, especially for somebody that's not really knowledgeable with mini ITX builds, maybe building a mini ITX for the first time. So let's have a look around then. So to remove the side panels, first you need to pull off the glass. Really simple, just pull it off from the bottom, and then the second label here says pull that one off, so they come off pretty easily, all tool free. In fact, taking all the side panels off is a completely toolless design. And then you can see there's another label here, number 3, and it tells you to slide this up. That's quite simple. You might notice over time, if you're sliding that on and off quite regularly, these what should we call them, runners on the side here, they're actually made out of plastic and they can get a bit of wear on them and the paint rubs against them. It can be a bit tighter sliding it on and off. If you want to improve that and make it a nice smooth action again, bit of furniture polish on a cloth, rub it on there and it becomes almost lubricated, and it's nice and easy to slide it on and off again. So once you've got the panels off, you're left with just a bare chassis frame. Power supply and the all-in-one CPU cooler are already pre-installed in there. So is the 92mm fan, and so is the PCIe Gen 4 riser cable. We'll come back to that in a minute, because just having a quick look at these side panels, they're all made out of steel. So this is the main one that slides off. Inside there as well, you've got dust filters. The back panel, again, is made out of steel. No dust filter on that one though. And then the other is a tempered glass panel, and we've got a peel on the front of this. I would have liked to have seen in this refresh of the H1 maybe a vented front panel, because for me tempered glass is there to have a look inside and be able to see the wonderful creation that you've built, but looking inside the H1, it's not really, you know, it's not really that pretty, is it? Basically a bunch of cables and things, maybe around the GPU side you can see a bit of illumination, but I would have liked to have seen another one of these that could go on the front, and then, you know, you got a full high airflow version, but NZXT chose not to do that. And I think actually it had been mentioned to them by the community. I think there was quite a few people in the community that asked for that, but it's not come. So we've still got the tempered glass. So another new feature of the H1 V2 is behind this panel. So again, this is a tool-free removal. It just pops out, and then you can see this is the fan controller. So connected to that is the pump from the AIO, CPU cooler fan, and the rear exhaust fan. Behind that is the new power supply, 750 watt, 80 plus gold rated, and then further behind that is an SSD Caddy. Again, this is a completely toolless installation process. You just slide it and it just locks in place, and then to release it, just push the tab back and it pulls out. I've got to quickly mention something about this SSD Caddy, because the first time I slotted the SSD into that side and then pulled it out again, the little plastic tab actually broke off. The other piece of it's there. So the durability of that plastic is questionable. There is space in there for two 2.5 inch drives. No room in this case for 3.5 inch hard drives, to be fair. Is anybody really going to be installing 3.5 inch drives in a mini ITX system these days? I don't think so. Then you come around to this other side, you can see there's another label here telling you to remove these screws. So you just undo these screws and then you can hinge this back, and that is the 140mm all-in-one CPU cooler in there. And then here a bit of polystyrene, really dense polystyrene, protecting the CPU block. Again, another plastic cover on the bottom, so that's nicely protected. This CPU block does come with some thermal compound pre-applied. However, I've removed it because I've already been doing some thermal testing. So when you get to this point, you're ready to install the motherboard into the case. I've already installed the CPU, so we've got an AMD Ryzen 7 5800X and also an M.2 drive is already installed in there. It's the PNY XLR8 Gaming 1TB PCIe Gen 4 drive. This is actually a really good drive for upgrading the PS5, but we think it's better put to use in a PC. So you can just slide the board in from the side. Nice and easy, so plenty of space to get in at the top and through the sides for connecting cables up and what have you. Put the 4 screws in the board like normal. Normally I would have installed the RAM into the slots on the board before putting the board in place, but I found with this case it's easier to put the RAM in after because it gives you a bit more space to connect up the 24-pin cable and the other front panel connectors and front panel USB, etc. So that's the next thing to do. 24-pin plugs in. And a good thing with this case again is because power supply is pre-installed and the all-in-one CPU cooler, all the cables are kind of routed already. A lot of cables come round this side, so the fan cables and the EPS power connector, which we can plug in now, they're already pre-routed, so you don't have to worry too much about cable management. To be fair, there's not a lot that goes into the cable management in this anyway, because there's only really one way that it can go, and it's not the neatest thing in the world, but it is perfectly functional. So most of the cables are already in place. There's just one or two that you might have to just, you know, undo these Velcro straps and just strap them back just to hold them in place, keep them out of the way. So 24-pin is plugged in, then the front panel, that's quite easy. That plugs straight in there. It's just a single front panel connector. On some boards there is like a breakaway cable that has individual pins, but on this Gigabyte board the layout of the pins is perfectly fine for the single cable. There is a tack cable as well that comes from the pump. That is just to plug into the CPU header on the motherboard, just to stop the motherboard throwing a wobbler and thinking that there's no CPU fan connected up. And then there's front panel audio. That again is pretty self-explanatory, just plugs in, and again that is kind of routed in the correct position. You can always push it back a bit and take up any of the excess. And then the front USB is a USB 3 connector, and again you can see that just plugs in pretty easily there, and any excess just pushed back. So that's simple as well. And then the other thing to connect up is this USB connection. That is the USB connection from the fan controller. So that wants to go to a USB 2 header on your motherboard, which you can see on this board, located just here. So I can connect that up to that. So that's pretty much it for the front panel connections and all the headers, fan headers, EPS connectors installed as well. Other thing you can do now is take off the protective cover and plug in the PCIe Gen 4 riser. That plugs in nice and easily. It's angled and it's got like a bracket that shapes it into position. So again, that's nice and easy. So now I've got all those installed. Plug the RAM into its slots. So there you go, you see the RAM's installed. And then now the only other thing really in this side of the system is to install the CPU block. So normally, like I said earlier, there would be some thermal compound pre-applied to that block. I've already had a system in and out a few times, so that's gone. So I'm going to use a bit of this Arctic MX4. The other thing you need to do as well is install the correct upper mounting bracket for the CPU block. It comes with an Intel bracket on. We're using AMD platform, so that just slides out. And then the AMD bracket obviously comes in the accessories box. So just slot that in place. And then you can move these tubes if you find that it's a bit easier when you're initially installing the block. So I like to have them, put them a bit straighter just while I install the block. Then you just have to slacken the screws off if they're a bit tight. Hook those in place, and then you just want to tighten these 2 screws up pretty evenly as well to help spread the thermal compound and spread the pressure across the top of the CPU evenly. So these have got the spring tension on the screw, so you can't really over tighten these. And then there's another label on the CPU and also on this door for the radiator, and this just tells you that you need to make sure that these tubes are pushed down like so. And the tubes down on the CPU block are pushed down, so when you shut the door nothing gets trapped. So that's pretty much everything inside there. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but it's quite simple to install, and we'll see in a bit that it's functional as well. So again, just tighten up these screws. One thing to note about these screws compared to the original H1, these are actually captive in this bracket, so there's no chance of them falling out. On the original H1 they weren't captive, and it's potentially you could, you know, undo that screw, could drop into the power supply or something like that. So good to see that they made those screws captive. So then we come round to the other side of the chassis where the main focus for the improvements has been. You can see there's the 92mm exhaust fan, and that is pre-installed as an exhaust, so that's going to push out warm air. That runs up to 1800 RPM. As you can see, we've got a bigger area now in this side of the case for the latest NVIDIA 30 series and AMD 6000 series cards. So on the original H1 you wouldn't have been able to fit a card like this Sapphire Radeon RX 6800 Nitro Plus. The maximum you could fit in the original I think was 2.5 slots, but what you'll find with a lot of the mid to higher end RTX 30 Radeon 6000 cards, a lot of them are 2.7 slots thick. So this case now will allow you to fit up to a 58mm thick card, which is a proper 2.7 slot thickness card. So also I think as well the length of the card has been improved by about 20mm. I think before it was like a maximum length of 304mm. Now you can fit up to a 324mm card in there. To fit the graphics card, you just need to remove the 2 screws from the PCIe slots. No covers on these slots. And then it's just a very simple case of putting it in position, lining up, and pushing it into the riser, and you can see that's a good fit now. It's quite close to the front, but because the panel there is the vented panel, there shouldn't be a problem with airflow. So there's good improvement there with the length and width and the size of the graphics card. And as I've mentioned as well, the power supply now at 750 watts has also been improved, so we should have the power as well to run these bigger cards, as well as the space to fit them in. Once you've got the card physically installed, then obviously all you need to do is connect up the power cables. This card takes 2 PCIe power cables, but the power supply has 3 connectors, so again, should be enough for any of the high-end cards on the market. And that is it, really. That's your system built. What I will say about this is it is extremely simple to build the system inside. The little pointers you get on these labels helps. Not the type of person to read the manual. You probably can get away with installing a system just by looking at these labels. Obviously, if you're an advanced user and you built plenty of systems, it's pretty straightforward anyway. That's pretty much it. It's not the best looking thing once it's built, and that simplicity kind of works against it in some ways, because for somebody like myself who feels like the whole point of building your own PC is to select your own parts and be able to kind of put your own mark on the system when you're building it, you don't really have that option with this H1. There's only really one way to build it. You are kind of forced into using NZXT parts such as the power supply and the CPU cooler, because you can't actually buy the H1 as a bare unit. It has to be bought as a package with the cooler, power supply and everything else already, which is great for the novice user that just wants to get this system together quickly and get on with using it. But for a more advanced system builder or somebody that's more enthusiastic about the builds and wants to put their own stamp on the system, that's where something like maybe the Cooler Master NR200P or another case that allows you to chop and change a bit more. So to finish off then, just need to slide these panels back on. Again, very simple, just engage the runners and it just slides in position. You can only put it on way because obviously the front I/O cutout is on there, so you can't go wrong with how you put that back together. And then it's the tempered glass panel, clips on the front, and then the vented back panel again clips on, tool free, and there it is, system built in probably 20 minutes I'd say. Because the case was designed with this vertical orientation, it means that everything is plugged in at the bottom, so power plugs in there. You need to plug your graphics card in there as well. If you want keyboard and mouse, can be plugged in there. So when you tip the system back upright, you'll see that all the cables come out of this little cutout at the bottom here, which is nice and neat and tidy looking. Only problem with that is if you want to plug something into USB or something after, and you want to plug it in at the bottom there, you've got to tip the system back up again, which could be a problem depending on where you've got your system located. I suppose that is probably one of the reasons why NZXT added another USB Type A port to the top. Still got a USB Type C port on there as well, which is good, and a 3.5mm audio jack. And in the box with the accessories, the audio jack comes with a splitter that splits it off to headphone and microphone. So as you can see, the system's up and running, everything's working as it should be, which is great. And the Time Spy stress test is just running there in the background. Before I wrap up this review, I just want to quickly go over the thermal performance as well, because we've run some comparison tests between the new H1 V2 as they're calling it and the original. And NZXT in this review guide makes a big deal about the improvements in thermals, because as well as adding support for bigger, more powerful graphics cards, they were also concentrating on the thermals as well, with these bigger air vents and with the inclusion of that 92mm fan. Initially, during our testing, we're actually looking at slightly higher CPU temperatures with the V2, but after investigating why that was, we noticed that the V2 comes with the AIO fan as an exhaust, whereas in the original H1 we had that configured as an intake. We switched the fan round on the V2 so it was an intake, and we saw an improvement in CPU temperature. To measure just the CPU temperature on its own, I ran the Cinebench R23 benchmark in a loop for 60 minutes and recorded the average temperature across the test using HW Info. And as you can see, the difference in CPU temperature between the V1 and the V2 is virtually non-existent, less than 1 degree C during our test. In NZXT's own test, I think they stated 1.6 degrees C lower CPU temperature in the V2 compared to the V1, which we class as within margin of error. Anyway, nothing wrong at all with the H1 V1's CPU temperature, so we're more than happy with the V2. And don't forget, this is using an AMD Ryzen 7 5800X with that dense CCD configuration, so it's a difficult CPU to keep cool at the best of times. And then for a combined test to measure both the CPU and GPU temperature simultaneously, we ran the Cinebench R23 stress test again for 60 minutes, and at the same time ran the 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme stress test. There was a noticeable decrease in the GPU temperature using the H1 V2. We recorded almost 10 degrees C lower GPU temperature in the H1 V2 compared to the V1. The reason that the V2 provides significantly better GPU temperature is due to that 92mm exhaust fan. We ran the combined test again with that fan disabled, and you can see the GPU temperature increased. So the addition of that 92mm fan, these larger air vents, and maybe a little bit more space around the GPU is obviously helping to keep the GPU cooler. Because the Sapphire card that we've used in this build wouldn't have fit in the original H1 V1, for the thermal test I use this AMD Radeon RX 6900 XT, so this is a card that will fit in both systems. So that's pretty much it for the H1 V2. It will be available at most retailers around the 15th of February, priced at £339. It's not cheap, but it does come with a quality 750 watt gold rated power supply, a good quality all-in-one CPU cooler, more than capable of cooling high-end hardware such as the build that we've got in here. Also PCIe Gen 4 riser cable, everything like that adds up. So it's probably maybe not as cheap as if you sourced everything separately yourself, but it's going to save you time, you know, trawling through all the different sites trying to get the best deal. It's ideal for those novice users that maybe not as confident with mini ITX as they are maybe as a full-size build, and kind of half the work's already done for you with the power supply already been installed, cables are routed. So for me, the only thing I would have liked to have seen would have been a vented front panel. I don't really think tempered glass is that important on a case where the inside doesn't really look up to much. This is certainly better looking on the outside than it is on the inside, and maybe with a vented front panel, maybe the thermal performance could have been even better. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the NZXT H1 V2. If you have, please make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like what we do here at Kit Guru, you can always head over to our store and pick up some Kit Guru merchandise. And as always, if you want to catch up on the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.